Welcome to the debate. When a crisis negotiator sits down to talk someone off a literal ledge, they aren't, looking for leverage.
Right. They're looking to understand that person's deepest fears.
Exactly. So today, we're looking at our source material on modern negotiation and asking a pretty core question. Does everyday negotiation require that same profound level of empathy?
Or does framing empathy as this tactical, secret weapon to uncover hidden needs actually destroy the exact trust it's trying to build?
Spot on. And I'm taking the position that empathy, precisely because it uncovers those hidden needs and, naturally reduces tension, is the essential functional framework for creating deals that actually last.
And I take the opposing view, framing empathy as a tool you deploy simply to, increase your chances of getting what you want, presents a real paradox. Turning genuine human connection into a tactical instrument for personal advantage risks completely undermining the trust required for any lasting agreement.
Let's start with how the text actually defines empathy, because it strips away all the sentimentality. It explicitly says empathy isn't just about being nice. It's an active mechanism, right? When you intentionally put yourself in the other person's shoes, you uncover what they want and, more importantly, why they want it.
Right, the why is the big focus.
Yeah, and psychologically, this is what reduces the friction in a room. It builds trust because you are literally validating their reality. It's, a highly rational, functional approach to mutual benefit.
I come at it from a different way. I understand the appeal of that framework. It makes the messy business of human emotion feel clean and manageable.
Sure.
But we have to look at the underlying endpoint the material sets up. The text ties uncovering those hidden needs and fears directly to adjusting your approach so you can reach your own goals.
Well, yes, it's a negotiation.
But if the ultimate finish line is your personal gain, then utilizing another person's fears isn't really empathy at all. It's tactical intelligence gathering, and that completely contradicts the spirit of the real connection the text claims to build.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. It's not data mining. Think about the physical mechanics of tension.
Okay.
If you're driving a car with a wildly overinflated tire, you don't just ignore it and keep driving, right? Or try to force the rubber to grip the road. You have to let the air out first.
Yeah. Relieve the pressure.
Exactly. You have to relieve the pressure before you can safely get where you're going. Empathy in negotiation is that release valve. When the text talks about understanding how the other person feels and why, it's explaining the mechanism of cognitive friction. People literally cannot mentally process a compromise when their brain is completely flooded with defensiveness.
That is a great analogy, letting the air out of the tire. But let's extend it. If I'm the one in the passenger seat and I realize you only cared about the air in the tire because you wanted to drive me to a destination I never agreed to.
Oh, come on, that's not...
No, really, I'm going to feel manipulated. This is where the phrase secret weapon from the text really bothers me. How can a negotiator build genuine trust if they view their understanding of my fears as a covert tool?
Because the trust is a byproduct of the...
But if I'm sitting across the table from you, say, negotiating a salary, and I realize you unearthed my professional anxieties just to figure out the cheapest number I'll accept, the trust doesn't just erode, it vanishes. It ceases to be connection and becomes extraction.
That's an interesting point, though. I would frame it differently. The text isn't suggesting you use their fears against them to give them a bad deal. You aren't weaponizing their fears.
It literally calls it a secret weapon.
Yes, but you are weaponizing empathy against the tension of the negotiation itself. By reducing that tension, you create an environment where trust can actually grow. When someone feels heard, their neurobiology actually changes. Like, their cortisol drops. That's not manipulation, that's just effective communication.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. If we're talking about effective communication, authenticity is the absolute bedrock.
I agree with that.
But the text says to use empathy to adjust your approach. If your approach is shifting purely based on the vulnerabilities I expose, you're wearing a mask. You are creating a synthetic environment.
I wouldn't call it synthetic.
We see this in corporate settings all the time, right? The manager who uses active listening, nodding, and repeating your concerns back to you. Not because they care, but because they read a management book that told them it's the fastest way to get you back to work. Humans have an incredibly fine-tuned radar for that kind of synthetic empathy.
But we aren't talking about faking it. The material relies on a classic collaborative sequence. It brings up the Stephen Covey principle: seek first to understand, then to be understood.
Right, a classic.
That's not a trick. You literally cannot reach an agreement without validating the other party's reality first. You have to bridge the psychological gap before you can bridge the material one. That sequence, understand them, so they feel calm enough to understand you, is the prerequisite for any cooperative human endeavor.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered that the text is using Covey's collaborative principle to justify a fundamentally self-interested outcome?
How so?
Well, seek first to understand is a beautiful ethos when the goal is mutual harmony. But in this specific context, it's immediately followed by the promise of increasing your chances of reaching your own goals. It really begs the question, is seeking to understand genuinely collaborative if the ultimate aim is just to win the negotiation? It feels like using a philosophy of mutual understanding as a Trojan horse.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because reaching your own goals and building a real connection aren't mutually exclusive. In fact, the text is arguing that doing the former properly actually requires the latter.
I think it's a slippery slope.
Let's ground this in reality, okay? Imagine a supplier who needs a higher price because they are terrified of going bankrupt, and a buyer who needs a lower price because of strict budget cuts. Both are acting in self-interest, right?
Sure.
But if the buyer uses empathy to uncover that supplier's fear of bankruptcy, they might restructure the deal to pay faster rather than paying more. The buyer gets their lower price, the supplier gets their immediate cash flow. That elegant solution only happens if the buyer uncovers the fear.
I'll concede that in that specific scenario, uncovering the underlying motivation creates a fantastic bridge. But notice what you did there.
What did I do?
You described a scenario where the empathy led to an outcome that genuinely addressed the other party's fear. The risk the text introduces is when it frames empathy simply as a tool for your own success, without mandating that you actually solve the fears you uncover.
Well, you can't solve everything.
Right, but uncovering a fear is powerful, yes. But holding that fear in your hand and using it merely to calibrate your own demands, that's where the danger lies.
As we draw this discussion to a close, my view remains that the material brilliantly reframes empathy. It takes it from a passive trait, just being nice, and turns it into an active, functional skill that reduces tension and secures lasting deals. It bridges the gap between competing interests by acknowledging human reality and addressing the cognitive friction that ruins most negotiations.
And my warning stands. While understanding the why behind someone's demands is undoubtedly crucial, treating empathy as a secret weapon to exploit those needs for your own goals risks undermining the exact trust required for any meaningful partnership. If empathy is just another tactic, it loses the authenticity that makes it powerful in the first place.
Yet I think we both clearly agree on the central truth from the source material. Actively listening and putting yourself in the other person's shoes fundamentally alters the dynamic of a negotiation. It forces hidden motivations to the surface.
Absolutely. The mechanics of uncovering those motivations are undeniable. The real complexity lies in what we do with that information once it's finally out in the open.
Exactly. Human interaction is inherently complex, and balancing personal goals with genuine connection is something every professional has to navigate. We leave it to you to decide whether empathy is a genuine bridge between people or the ultimate strategic tool.
Well said.
Because whether you're negotiating a multi-million-dollar contract or just deciding where to go for dinner, the most dangerous thing you can do is fundamentally misunderstand the person sitting across from you.